We made it through a disastrous Thursday night football, Rams and 49ers matchup. And we're on to the meat and potatoes of week 15, the first round of the NFL best ball playoffs. And we talk a lot about the players you might need, the players you want to have on your advancing best ball teams now that the playoffs are here. But I wanted to dig in a little bit more to some of the data, some of the projections on some of these players for week 15 and beyond. They stack up at their position at again, from a projection, what our point scoring expectations are, and look at some of the advance rate information to see maybe some gaps, some teams, some player combinations, some quarterback stacks, some different things that we should be excited for that are maybe a little underowned or overowned or a little high leverage potential options this week. So that's what we're going to get into here before we head into the weekend and really start to sweat those teams. All right, guys, happy week 15. Happy making it to Friday after that holy shit awful Thursday night football game. What a disappointment. At least on the positive side, if you advance the Puka Nacua team, we got a little something. If you advance the George Kittle team, we got a little something, maybe more so in full PPR. We got a little Kyron, but of course, no touchdowns scored on Thursday Night Football. Not awesome. I was sweating out, particularly Kyron Williams. He is on my last remaining eliminator team. And so that was not great, but it could be worse. It could be worse last night, but it also could be better. And we're going to try to find some of those guys where it's definitely going to be better and maybe can have the most impact. Again, the guys you need, right? Is a cheesy phrase that we use here in best ball land amongst all the best ball sickos. But there are some guys, a ton. I think we're all looking through all of our teams and like wanting to see certain players pop up or getting excited. And without looking at any actual data, looking at any projections, looking at any advance rates, looking at any combinatorial stuff, it's just a lot of vibes, right? Where we're just guessing who we think the guys that we really want to have on these teams. And some of that is going to be true, right? And no one is going to be upset if they have a highly owned player who can score a ton of points, right? For instance, Saquon Barkley and Jamar Chase are the two highest exposure players. We'll dig into a little bit of some of the combos of those guys. So we'll talk about maybe some underowned guys. We'll talk about maybe some guys who are not necessarily underowned, but maybe from a cost perspective, they project awesome for this week. It's going to be typically a lot of the cheaper running backs, right? The Chuba Hubbards and the Chase Browns and such that are cheap. Their advance rates are not low, but they're not quite to that, 50% level, but they project far better than their prices. So their impact on teams can be massive. We'll get into some of those guys. We'll get into some of the combos of the first 3 round players. So we have, the rounds 1, 2, and 3, and those players get drafted together a certain amount of time, some very little and some a lot. And we can look at some of those and see how those advance, how many of those teams are even in the remaining in the field. And then some quarterback stack stuff. Spoiler, lots of Joe Burrow stacks out there, which again is fine. We're not upset having Joe Burrow, but we probably got to find some other ways to make it up on the field because the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase is not sneaking by any pods here. Moving forward, and then we can take a quick look at Jamar Chase teams and Saquon teams to see, okay, what I don't want to not have those guys, right? That's the fun part about best ball and really, any one of these games. There's nothing that says you don't want just because a guy is highly owned in the fantasy playoffs. These guys advanced at about a 50% clip, meaning 50% of the Saquon teams advanced. So really, that's 25% of the total advancing teams that have Saquon Barkley. Oh my God, I just got allergic. I just got sick. My body was rejecting the fact that I was talking about Saquon there. It made my camera blurry, and I feel a fit of sneezes coming here. So I have to remember to call him Voldemort because I rarely drafted him. But you know, it's foolish to think, oh well, I just don't want Jamar Chase. I just don't want Saquon Barkley. No, you still want the best players. You still want the guys that A, helped you get more teams through, but B, are just awesome. You want those guys on your advancing teams. But ideally, I don't want to have them with all of the exact same other guys that everybody else has, because it just becomes more difficult when we got to finish first out of 13 or first out of 12 or first out of 10 or first out of 16 next week. We need to have something different than a couple other people because we need to get first, not just top two, not just, top half. This is an eliminator. We need to get first. So I don't want to be coin flipping Jacoby Myers versus Josh Downs. Ideally, I can't help it if I am, but that's not the goal, right? Yeah, thank you, Scott. As much needed. I did just take the dogs for a walk, like literally right before this. I still have hoodie and stuff on from going to. It is cold. And it's like 25 or something. I guess I could look. It is. It's got to 30 here today, but it's windy as shit and the sun is not out and it was miserable out there. So I think I was building up a little cold there, a little sniffles, and then started talking about Voldemort, which really brought it out, brought out the allergies in me. A couple quick comments before we dive into. We'll start with some of the projection type stuff, which I think is pretty fun. Charles says, so you're telling us we need a repeat of Thursday Night Football for Cincinnati and Tennessee? Down with the Cincinnati teams. Yeah. I'm not so sure the Bengals are going to not score a touchdown. I'm not sure a Bengals game could ever be like, what would have to happen? I think it would have to be like, in the Dark Knight, or no, Dark Knight Rises, the Bane Batman, when they have they like blow up the stadium or whatever, and all the Heinz Ward is returning the kick or whoever it is, and everybody just starts falling through the cracks. Like we would need that for a Bengals game to not have like multiple touchdowns because they're going to score and their defense is going to allow some scores. So I'm not sure that that one's too feasible, but it's possible that the Bengals don't blow the lid off of the slate. Pi says, tell me it's Brock. We'll get into Brock here in just a second. And yeah, weather, wind, and earthquakes is what we need for Cincinnati to not keep scoring. Although they do play Denver in the finals, and assuming Cincinnati is continuing to cook, that's at least not the best spot of all time. I'm not sure there's a bad spot for Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase right now and Chase Brown, but it could be worse if you don't have them. And if you do have them, awesome. Who the heck doesn't want the Cincinnati Bengals on their teams? Just to that point, Jason, we'll get into some of this. Would you be excited to see Higgins as leverage off of Chase? I will. You'll see as we start to look at the projections and we look at the Burrow stacks and we look at Jamar Chase and combinations and all that kind of stuff, and T. Higgins himself, his projection, his ownership. I think you'll see maybe where some of that leads. So let's start with some of the projection stuff. We're going to nerd out in the spreadsheets here today. And I have this. So let me undo the positional filter. I'm going to keep quarterbacks out of here to start. We'll keep quarterbacks out to start. So for all running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, aka flex plays, right? This is sorted by fantasy point projection, right? So the actual, and this is a half point PPR, I believe I put that in here. So nonetheless, I can double check that. But anyway, not important. Just the fantasy points projections sorting right now, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, from the highest point projection down to the lowest point projection. And I mentioned this on Blue Sky. If anybody, I've been posting a lot of my just like random data thoughts, and I've been posting a lot of this kind of data, projections data, advance rate data, some football stat bro data and stuff over there. So go check that out. But most people would assume that Saquon Barkley is the highest projected player, right? 50% advance rate, Everybody says you can't win without Saquon. Saquon is the greatest football player of all time. But if you dig into the nuts and bolts, now I haven't updated these projections today, so there could be some, lingering effects of some minor tweaks, but it's good enough for a baseline. Early week 15 projections. And then, it is matchup based. So we can't just like copy and paste this next week, but I will probably pull this next week to look at so we can have some of the same conversation. Bijan Robinson is the running back one by fantasy point projections, a median projection, but you also see that his ceiling is still a tick higher than everybody else on the slate. Very close with Derrick Henry and Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley, but his projection is the highest. So what does that mean? Projections are just projections, So as you see here, this has the Rams guys and stuff on here. Puka Nacua was projected for 21 points. He obviously did not hit that, but it's indicative of their workload, their overall efficiency, their offensive efficiency, their expected scoring on their offense, and just everything is baked in, right? Game totals, blah blah blah, matchups, and now that's a little bit because the Eagles are playing the Steelers. Bijan Robinson is playing the Raiders. Derrick Henry comes in second from an overall points perspective. So it almost feels like Derrick Henry, because he has not been so good lately, right? He was awesome down to start the season and was not quite as good here the last month and a half or so, right? Saquon, it used to be, oh my God, Saquon and Henry. And then it started to become Saquon and like, oh yeah, Derrick Henry. And then it just became Saquon. And now it's Saquon and Jamar Chase. That's all anybody cares about. But we got a big dog spot here today, or here this Sunday. Almost a very close, less than a half point away, or I guess it is a half point away from Bijan Robinson's projection, whereas Saquon is really a point lower than Bijan Robinson. Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley projecting just about the same, fitting given that they were both 250% advance rate players. So you see right here in the advance rate section, the difference, I can zoom a little bit more too, sorry. You see in the advance rate column, Bijan Robinson only advanced at a 17% clip, whereas Derrick Henry 35, Jamar Chase 51, Saquon Barkley 48. This is using Best Ball Mania data because it's the best data that we have for advance rates, and I think it's a good enough barometer, right? Interestingly enough, I was kind of hoping Puka would put up a big game because Puka advanced at just a 10% rate, even and it's understandable given the injury and such, but he was a top 5 projected overall point scorer on this slate, despite being a 10% advanced rate player. Those are guys that if you can get through. Now, again, Puka did not smash. You're not super excited about, I guess on DraftKings, it's okay to have Puka, but he didn't like do what we really, really want from the low owned piece to get you there. But him and Bijan, in terms of this top 5, are significantly lower owned heading into week 15. Now, this could change if Puka didn't blow up, so this one probably won't change too much. But Bijan, of course, this could change, a Saquon or a Chase, particularly a Chase dud and a big Bijan game. We'll be looking at week 16 advance rates, and it'll be a little bit different, right? Bijan will be more represented in week 16 than he is in week 15, if that happens. But as of right now, there's really only so many teams, right, that can get through with Bijan Robinson, even if he has that big game. So he's naturally going to be a little bit of a lower owned piece. A couple other quick call outs that I thought were fun. Now, these are not necessarily low advance rate players, but the very next two, player number 6 and player number 7, again, non-quarterbacks, fantasy point projections for week 15, Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard. So if anyone is telling you that zero running back has failed this year, it's just not true. Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard, both a 27% and a 31% advance rate. So clearly very good plays, similar to a Derrick Henry level advance rate, but Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard, right, mid to late round running backs. Those are the kind of guys that can make up the gap. If you have Jamar Chase or had Puka Nacua, if you had either one of the first round wide receivers and you have Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard on that team, you're going to have a team, even Justin Jefferson, quite frankly, down here, which we'll get to, or Nico Collins that we'll get to. Even if you have those guys, like there's plenty of running backs on down this list that were a little bit cheaper. You see, this is assuming Ken Walker is out, but Sharbs is up there near the top of the list as well. And so, there a good question from Charles. Advance rate is based off of total player team drafted. So 51% of Barkley drafted teams advanced. That's correct. So Saquon Barkley is still only taken in 1 out of every 12 teams, right? He is drafted in every single draft. And so 1 out of every 12 teams has Saquon. 48% of those 1 out of 12 moved on. So half of the advancing team, right? So 2 teams advanced from every. If only 1 team advanced, we would be saying, yeah, okay, 48% of total teams left have Saquon, but it's really 24 because 2 teams advanced from every league, every original regular season pod, and naturally only 1 of them has Saquon Barkley. So 48% of the Saquon teams, but that's still only 24% of the total advancing teams. Whereas Jamar Chase, 51% of Jamar Chase teams advanced in, so 26% of 26% of the field left has them. We can get to in a second. Let's look at that actually really quickly while we're over here. So just so I can quote it, the Jamar Chase teams. So this data is the player combinations for the first 3 rounds and how many times they were drafted together and what their advance rate was. So you see here, Jamar Chase with Saquon Barkley was drafted 5,732 times. Jamar Chase was drafted with Saquon Barkley. 4,824 of them advanced at an 84% clip. So when someone says, oh, it's an 84% advance rate, do 84% of teams have those 2? No, not even close. 4,824 teams are still remaining with Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley. It's just that when you drafted those 2, you were basically gifted an advance. You had to screw it up to I feel bad for those 16%. Can you imagine? I'm glad I don't have any because I'd feel real bad. And I'm sorry if you do. I'm not trying to throw shade. We all have some teams that were. I have a Saquon team not advancing in the DraftKings 555. It got like 7th. So this is not shade, but it would suck. It would really suck to have be in that 16% of those guys. But just for instance, this is one of my favorite kind of stats of like when we talk all summer about like player combinations and maybe leaning a little bit more into more infrequently drafted player combinations. This is a great example as to why all the hoopla, right, is about Jamar Chase and Saquon Barkley right now, as it should be. They both have insane advance rates. They are insane players to have. They're the best 2 picks in the best pick in round 1 and the best pick in round 2 up until this point through 14 weeks. But Jamar Chase was drafted, 2,100 times more with Devon Achane. So the fact that Devon Achane and Jamar Chase, that combo, right, advanced, we'll just call it 60%, 59% of Jamar Chase, Devon Achane teams advanced out of that 7,800. But because there were so many more of that combination, there's actually just about as many Chase Achane teams left as there are Chase Saquon teams left. So it's such an interesting part and a great indicator of like, it's not to say don't draft those guys. Of course. Like, do you want Jamar Chase and Devon Achane? Yeah, of course you do. But why do we talk during the summer about like, okay, this guy is a little bit more infrequently drafted with this guy? Nico Collins, as an example. Look, Nico has missed a significant amount of time, and 47% of Nico Collins teams with Jamar Chase advanced, but he's down, in more in the Saquon range. So there's only 2,700 Jamar Chase, Nico Collins teams left, 4,600 Jamar Chase, Devon Achane teams left. So just, one of those, I mean, RIP Jalen Waddle. Like if we're looking at Jamar Chase team that we don't, I mean, Jamar Chase was so good. Jamar Chase was so good. And Jalen Waddle technically stayed healthy that There's still 3,800 Chase Waddle teams left. There's almost as many Jamar Chase Waddle teams left as there are Jamar Chase Saquon Barkley teams left. Like, think about that. That's crazy. RIP to the Cooper Cup teams. 56% advance rate on Jamar Chase Cooper Cup, and then goose. The old goose egg from Cooper Cup. But RGT says the Chase Ayuk combo is neck and neck with Chase Cup right now. Yeah, exactly. Chase Olave. If you have Chase Olave and you're in a pod with just so happens to have, let's just for fun, you're in a pod with a couple of Chase Cup teams and you have Chase Olave or Chase Ayuk, or is anybody else injured on here? These guys are all cheaper, so it doesn't quite count, right? But like Chase Rashi Rice, you're like, well, now we're on a level playing field. It's all lined up now. Tim says that Chase and London team. Let's see how many Chase London teams we have. Yeah, wow. So here's a good one. We talked a little bit about this on the Tuesday show. I don't remember. Chase and London was not something that you would necessarily manufacture in terms of, you didn't have to move anybody around the board. What you really needed was probably just London to fall to the mid-second, but technically I guess Chase could fall to 10 or 11 and you could get this combination, but it really, really rarely happened. Only 956 total teams with Jamar Chase and Drake London. And Drake London, now Bijan projects the best. Drake London is not quite having that. We can go back to the projection in a second. Not amazing, not as amazing as Bijan is, but he still is on the Falcons. He still is in a good spot. He still is pretty target dominant. Darnell Mooney has been limited in practice all week. Kyle Pitts is back on the milk carton. And so there's only 483 Chase London teams. So that's another very, very good one. Yeah, Tebow only had a 3-point head start. Interestingly, Debo's like one of those ones that the projections were still holding on to. If I were particularly running the projections, I think I would have nuked him a little bit more, but certainly behind Mike Evans. Cooper Kupp, again, 16-point projection, scores 0 points. So these things are not infallible, right? They are just projections, and football games have a ton of variance. And if everything just played out exactly according to projections, we wouldn't have DFS. We frankly wouldn't have that much best ball. It would only be injuries and such. But they're a good indicator of like overall expectation and the strength of that. Gibbs, Bijan, and Monty. I mean, geez, the Lions guys are just absolutely insane. This is funny. Tim mentions there was in the entire Best Ball Mania tournament, Garrett Wilson was drafted with Jamar Chase one time, and that team advanced. If it's one of you, let me see it. I want to see it. If one of you psychopaths was able to get, and not that Garrett Wilson is like incredible, but there's worse players to have than Garrett Wilson on your team. And if you want to talk about unique combos, you want to know the easiest way to have a unique combo, be the only goddamn team in the whole tournament with that player combo to start. Chase and Gibbs is a ridiculous combo. Yep. That happened 493 times, right? Marv only happened 90 times. Not that we're excited for Marv, but again, the Puka one, Puka and Jamar Chase only happened 12 times. 4 of them got through. So we'll see. Those 4 teams could be dust after this week, and we never even have to worry about a Chase. You're probably worried about Chase Puka heading into last night. Now, Puka was fine. So it's not that if Chase has another big game, that team can definitely advance into week 16, but there's only 4 of them. So, a bad Chase game, and we may never have to worry about Jamar Chase Puka combo for the rest of Best Ball Mania. A couple more projection things to note. The T. Higgins comment from earlier. Would I like to have T. Higgins? Yeah, I would. We'll get into some of the QB stacks and T. Higgins level data as well, as much as he's paired with Joe Burrow. But T is the wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on projection this week. Hilariously, Juwan Jennings was 6. T. Higgins is one of the highest projected wide receivers. And so I know it feels bad. I know it feels like chase or bust, right? But T. Higgins is also in these phenomenal spots. And so that gives him a really strong projection and a really strong upside case. He has, a projection closing in on 20, right? He's really not that different from the Nico's. I think what I would classify T is that his projection is more fragile, similar to what we saw with Cooper Kupp last night, where the projection is what it is, and it's rooted in just basic, utilization data, and everybody uses kind of similar projection logic, but it's fragile, right? When you're the wide receiver 2 next to a superstar alpha, that can be good for you, and you can have big games sometimes, but also sometimes you can do what Kupp did last night. And so that's kind of what I would do, T. But to your point, T has just a 23% advance rate. I think we'll get to the like QB stack and stuff. I think if I had, I don't even think I would necessarily want Burrow on my T teams, like in terms of leverage. I'm not saying I don't want to go that far. I think having all of them is not only perfectly fine, it's great to have those teams, but if we're speaking strictly leverage, like how do I maximize my total leverage with T Higgins? Because he's not a lowly advance rate player. He's above average on his advance rate at 23%. It's just that Jamar's at 51 and Burrow is also quite high. So a lot of those teams, you'll see, let's just look at it right now. In terms of the QB stacks, the highest, let me go to the highest 2 advancing quarterback stacks are 1, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and 2, Joe Burrow and T. Higgins. So when I say if I'm maximizing my leverage, I think I would just want a one-off T. Higgins, or maybe I want Chase Brown on there too, because Chase Brown is awesome. Not that he's leverage, but if we're strictly like, how do I get through with like a Chase dud? I don't think I want Joe Burrow on that team either, because there are 7,200 Joe Burrow, T. Higgins stacks out there. Now there's more than 14,000 Joe Burrow plus Jamar Chase. So Burrow, Chase had a 51% advance rate. You add Burrow to that team, you boosted another 8% to a nice, cool, basically 60% of teams that drafted these two together. Now, again, same advance rate conversation, right? That's not 60% of total teams. They were drafted together 24,249 times, and 14,000 of them advanced. So it's really 14,000 teams left with Joe Burrow and T. Higgins. But like I said, there's still 7,200. Burrow, it's the second highest quarterback stack that's left in terms of raw number of teams. Interestingly, third is Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. Now, it only, air quotes, only advanced at a 29% clip. It was drafted 22.1 thousand times together was Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. I don't think you're upset about that, but just something to know. Rashad Bateman with Lamar Jackson. People really needed, maybe we'll have to dig into those Lamar Bateman teams, because advancing 35% with Bateman is pretty interesting. And then Mark Andrews, right? The guy who was the worst pick on the board after Thursday Night Football of week 1. He was cooked, right? It was Isaiah Likely season. We were all just miserable about our Mark Andrews teams. Well, he's the 5th highest owned stack left in all of Best Ball Mania, and advanced with Lamar Jackson at an above average rate at 26%. So 5,700 teams with Mark Andrews. Maybe my favorite stat, though, even more than Burrow with Chase and Burrow with T, is that Jermaine Burton, despite being truly useless, has been carried so much by Burrow and Chase and all of that. Jermaine Burton plus Joe Burrow is carried to a nice 36. So there's 5,000, 5,100 teams that have Joe Burrow and Jermaine Burton left on them. 36% of those advanced, despite the fact that Burton was nothing. I would imagine a lot of those have Jamar Chase, and maybe even T. Higgins, and maybe even Chase Brown. But an interesting one for sure, that the likes of Jermaine Burton and Mike Gesicki, and then Chase Brown is down here as well, right? You actually don't get to my guy. If we really want to leverage, we go to Andre Yoshivas, was drafted a little bit less frequently, 6,500 teams with Joe Burrow plus Yoshi. And that advanced at a 41% clip, but there's only 2,700 of them left. So just not low, but in terms of the Bengals stacks, it's the sixth highest owned Joe Burrow stack is Andre Yoshibats, despite the fact he keeps scoring a bunch of touchdowns. Just a couple more quick ones here. I wanted to point out, you want to see a funky one. The highest drafted quarterback and pass catcher stack, which is typically a wide receiver, but not always. The highest drafted was not Burrow Chase. It was actually Jalen Hurts, and A.J. Brown, drafted together 28,518 times. First round wide receiver with fourth round quarterback was the highest drafted quarterback stack. It did not go great. It wasn't horrible. A.J. Brown has done enough, and Jalen Hurts gets so many rushing touchdowns. It's been okay. But 15% of 20, let's call it 29,000, damn near 30,000 teams had Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, and 4,300 of them advanced. So that's an important the raw number is important when we get to this time of the season, right? You want to say, oh, well, they had low advance rates. It's like, yes, true. A.J. Brown has a low advance rate relative to the other first round picks. Jalen Hurts is neutral. So you would think, okay, well, that's going to give me leverage off of Saquon, right? Not really. Like, kind of, but like there's still 4,300 of those teams. Some of them have Saquon Barkley. It's just there was so many of that combination drafted that while you think it's leverage, it's like not real major leverage that we can capitalize on. Obviously, number 2, Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. That would have been my guess. Before I pulled this up, my guess would have been Dak CeeDee, because that just felt like everybody just did the, it lined up on that side of the board. People took tons of Dak CeeDee, and still 11% advanced, 3,000 teams with Dak CeeDee. Third to a Tyreek, down at 16%. Then we, of course, get to Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. One that I thought was of particular note, because this is kind of a double, maybe a triple whammy. It's a stack that was drafted a lot together, so it still has 3,300 teams, Kyler and Trey McBride, but the first tight end, right, that we saw that was frequently, this was drafted more than Lamar Andrews, which I don't think I would have said that either. But Kyler to Trey McBride, not a monster advance rate at 14%. So 3,300 teams with that left. But if we look at let's go back to the projection. Let's just look at tight end really quick. If we just look at tight end, you see Trey McBride from, again, thinking about projections, Trey McBride is slam dunk tight end 1. Not close. Look, as great as George Kittle is, so we came in under projection here in last night's game for George Kittle, as great as Brock Bowers is. And he's awesome. And I want Brock Bowers. The fact that Brock Bowers is now if we remove Kittle, Brock Bowers is the tight end 2 on the week at his price with his ceiling, right? Yeah, sign me up. And his advance rate was only 26%. So like Brock Bowers, hell yeah, dude. Sign me up for having Brock Bowers. But if I could have Trey McBride at 17, a little lower, with a 3.3 point gap to the tight end 2, he is a monster piece to have at neutral ownership. And then, like I said, if we look at the quarterback stack stuff, Kyler himself is not a major advance rate player. Let's see here. Kyler below average advance rate at 13%. He obviously has not been awesome this season, but if you look at their schedule, you look at who they have played. I don't mean forward. That being said, they do play New England this week, which is like a awesome matchup for all of the Cardinals. The Cardinals are a team kind of in week 15. I'm particularly for the whole playoffs. So They play the Patriots this week. They play the Panthers next week. Obviously, those are two of the best matchups you can have in all of football. And then the Rams in week 17, which maybe, isn't always the world's best matchup, but they did just give up 42 to the Bills. So I don't think their defense is unsolvable by any stretch of the imagination. The Cardinals have a nice little schedule, but they have played a brutal. So Seattle defense has gotten a lot better, and divisional opponent. They played them twice in the last 3 weeks. Minnesota, not a great matchup. The Jets, honestly, not that great of a matchup, but they beat the crap out of the Jets, scored 31 points, just a lot on the ground. The Bears, not an awesome, I guess they've sort of folded a little bit, but the defense is not terrible, at least when they were playing. Dropped 29 on them. Dolphins, Chargers, Packers, 49ers, Lions, right? Bills. These are all the defenses the Cardinals have played. And now they're about to play three of the worst defenses. So their advance rate data and all of the combinations, all that kind of stuff is pulled down by a worse matchup than they don't play the guys they've played now on into the playoffs. They were one that was really, really jumping out to me, with Kyler at 13%. And with Kyler McBride down at 14%, just 3,300 teams. Combine that with the fact that Trey McBride himself is not very is not super popular, and he is the highest projected tight end by a mile. Like I understand Brock. Look, I love Brock Bowers. I got tons of advancing Brock Bowers, but I think in the incredible rookie season for Brock Bowers and the fact that Trey McBride is not scoring touchdowns, like it's gonna happen. Like Trey McBride is not going to go the rest of his career without scoring touchdowns. He's too good. He is an elite tight end, in my opinion, even better than Brock Bowers. But even if we call them the same, you have this absolute superstar tight end, lowly advancing and about to run into three really, really good matchups. So Trey McBride is a huge guy for me in terms of could be the guy you need. He is that elite tight end to me. Let's see. Hit some. Jacob asks, Garendo advance rate on DK. Unfortunately, we don't have DraftKings data. So that's I won't know for sure on DraftKings, but I do think generally speaking, it's a fine enough looking at Best Ball Mania. So Garendo was advanced at about a 15% clip, but I don't think he was drafted. 1 second. Yeah, so he wasn't drafted that much, right? So in Best Ball Mania, DraftKings be a little different. I imagine it'll be a little higher in terms of total amount of times drafted. But you see here, Isaac Garendo was drafted about a very nice 6,900, almost a nice 6,900 times, and he only advanced at a 15% clip. So he's a guy who here down the stretch, now again, last night was not, it was fine, but it was not awesome for anybody on the 49ers. Jesus, what a disaster from the 49ers. But DK data is not public, so I don't have it, but I think that the Best Ball Mania stuff is at least a good, it'll be close enough. Generally, there's not going to be like Garendo advanced at a 40% clip on DraftKings and 15% on Underdog. He might be a little higher, but it shouldn't be too different. Yeah, this is insane. Scott has a Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Saquon Barkley, and Jalen Hurts team. Nuts. Absolutely nuts. Yeah. Rusty says this is taking into account the force field that keeps Trey McBride from the end zone. It does not. It does not. The projection is assuming he might at some point in his life catch a receiving touchdown. That's the assumption. The force field theory is a good one. And so maybe we should be looking at Marv a little bit more, or Michael Wilson or something. But yeah, I like this. What do you have? Multiple McBride Bowers teams. That's what I'm looking at. Those are the teams I'm looking at. Like, oh baby, because you could. It's one of the few tight end combos. Not that a tight end can't hit the flex, because of course they can, right? We could have multiple good games from tight ends. But if I had to bet on ones, I would be like, all right, I'm cool if I use both of these scores. It's these two guys, and obviously they're the best bet for getting a spike week out of your tight end spot. And then, of course, you only have 2 tight ends. So you have a bunch more running backs or wide receivers or quarterbacks or whatever. I agree with that. Tim says, at some point we should look at the top 3 round combos and sort by lowest advancing combos to see if there are any. Yeah, let's do it. I like it. This is why we do this live. So you guys can, okay, top 3 round combos, sort by the lowest number of advancing. Okay. All right. So this should be funny. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's going to be most of these are going to, if very few advanced, they were typically very infrequently drafted. And I feel safe to say there's probably going to be a bunch of Christian McCaffrey show up here, but we'll look there, and then maybe I'll filter out CMC just because he's obviously done for the season. But 24 total CMC London teams, and only one and only one got through, that poor soul. This is interesting. I know Brees is hurt, but if Brees were to come back, one Brees Bijan team, and it did advance. So that's kind of interesting. Here's a way to offset that this one team. We mentioned how popular the Hurts and AJB thing is. You want to know how to offset the Saquon thing and offset the chalkiness of Hurts plus AJB. Be the one and only Bijan plus AJ Brown team that advances into the playoffs. Let's see. Yeah. CMC Marv, not great. 5 Gibbs CMC teams, not great. Definitely going to be Marv showing up here quite a bit. Tyreek, Marv. So they don't have to worry about any Tyreek and Marv teams because they don't exist in the playoffs. You don't have to worry about this one singular Justin Jefferson and AJ Brown team. Man, can you imagine getting that and just how awesome you would feel having that team and then it doesn't get through? Oh, brutal. Yeah, so we talked about the Chase Wilson team. There's also one Justin Jefferson, Garrett Wilson team that advanced. Oh God. This, I can't believe 3 teams got through with this. 166 total Christian McCaffrey plus Jonathan Taylor teams. There are 3 left. CD London, okay, not you're definitely not loving it. Only a 2% advance rate on CMC and JT. Yeah. Oh baby. All right, the first one where 749 times is still not like a lot, but it's not nothing. And CMC plus Tank Dell 1% advance rate. 8 teams out of 749. Good Lord. And Tank has played. I know he's gotten banged up and stuff, but man, yeah. Put the sharps. Scott says pulling up Tank to the 2-3 turn is pretty. Or maybe you got a CMC fall. Right, you're in a wide receiver room or something. You got a CMC fall, but the sharps, the air quotes sharps. I'm gonna pull up Tank to the 1-2 turn to get unique with Christian McCaffrey. Only 749 of those. Right. Well, good luck getting it through to the playoffs. Amon-Ra and Puka would have been a nice one. 7 of those. We'll see if they can keep on moving. Chase Puka, right? That would have been. There's 4 total advanced Chase Puka teams that, like you said, we'll see if they all get wiped out, like we said earlier. Just quickly scroll and see, like you said, if there's any more kind of unicorns. A lot of Marv, Olave, Brees, JT, Debo, JJ Puka. So there's one that actually hit at a reasonable rate. I know it was still low, 60 total teams. I only have one of these on DraftKings. I have a JJ Puka team on DraftKings, so I don't know if it was probably a little more popular over there. But this is one. There's 20 of those, so there's still only 20 of those. Where is CMC Olave? That's a good question. I think maybe it got through a lot more. Let's look. All right, there's JT Olave, Marv Olave, London Olave, Debo Olave. There you go. Oh, oh no. 4,388 Christian McCaffrey and Olave teams were drafted. 79 remain for a beautiful 2% advance rate. And yes, CMC and Tank was worse, but it was drafted fewer times, right? Because we were talking about 700. Yeah, so 749 times with 8 with 8 advancing, and then CMC with Olave was somewhere on here. $4,000, right? So almost 6 times more frequent. But yeah, both 1 to 2% advance rate. Joshy has a Garrett Puka team. Let's see. All right, let's check out some Garrett Wilson teams. You said Garrett and Puka. Garrett. I guess I should just let's instead of searching, let's sort by this, and then go to Garrett. Here we go. Garrett Wilson, an interesting one with a low advance rate player, but he's alive. Garrett and what did you say, Puka? So yeah, 9%, 193. Garrett is like just kind of low across the board. Obviously, the Garrett Saquon pulled Garrett across the finish line at a reasonable clip, and so did Derrick Henry. But other than that, definitely just about anything Garrett Wilson, right? So the running backs kind of pulled Garrett into the playoffs a little bit, but just about anything else with Garrett is low owned for sure. Where was Chase? There was none of those. So, so you were one of the 2,000 Garrett and Puka owners that did not advance. If there's anything else you want to see here, I can pull it up really quickly. Otherwise, we can look at a couple more quarterback stacks. I was going to just quickly sort by advance rate because I was looking at the raw number of advancing, but then also just look at the percentage at which some of these teams advanced. Joe Burrow. This is probably not surprising. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I got you, Jacob. I'll look at that in a second. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Chase Brown. They're kind of all collective league winners on the same team. So, you put them all together, poof, right? You get a huge advance rate. Lamar Jackson with Derrick Henry, Jalen Hurts would say. So it's kind of interesting that I don't actually really know how interesting it is, but 3 of the 4 highest advance rate plays were these running backs who hit, but with their quarterbacks who also hit and stayed healthy. Yeah, Tim says this is maybe my favorite. This is maybe my favorite thing in all of this data. 4 times Taysom was drafted with MVS. 4 times. There's more Taysom plus MVS teams than Garrett Wilson plus Jamar Chase. Reminder: Taysom Hill was a quarterback during the summer on Underdog. So that's why he's showing up here, is because he was technically classified as a quarterback on Underdog. But MVS, if you recall, not on the Saints over the summer. So how the hell somebody stumbled? How people were taking Taysom Hill at all at quarterback, and then took a Taysom Hill team and somehow got it with MVS? There's 2 of those. Now, that would be incredible if Taysom Hill was still healthy, but unfortunately, those 2 teams just ran out of luck there with the Taysom Hill injury. But you see the advance rate stuff. Joe Burrow, Joe Burrow, Joe Burrow, Joe Burrow, Joe Burrow. Did we finally get to Baker? Right, we get away from Hurts, but I don't think that was driven by Hurts. I think that was driven by Saquon. Quite frankly, like look at all the running backs, man. Like Baker with Bucky, Burrow with Chase Brown, Lamar with Henry, Jalen Hurts with Saquon. So when you hit on an offense, and in particular, like you hit on the running back and the offense, and maybe those go hand in hand. Those have been real. Those are some of the highest advance rate plays that we've got here, right? If you hit on Bucky and you hit on the Bucks, in turn that hits on Baker. So now you have a late round running back smash and an offense smash, which means your quarterback's good. You might have Evans or Otten or Godwin, RIP, on here. So, same thing here. Like Hurts and Barkley just take all the touchdowns. So when the Eagles are scoring and they're running, you're getting all that. Same thing with Lamar and Derrick Henry. Obviously, Chase Brown being a huge smash with Joe Burrow. Just an interesting thing to, yeah, man. When they hit, like Updog says, QB running back stacks really raise the floor. When they come through, shoo, geez, man. Like look at those. That's nuts. Versaire wants to know about Bo Nix. Let's see. Clear. Bo Nix. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There were 8 different kinds. This is hilarious. So to be clear, Donald Parham and A.T. Perry were not on the Denver Broncos. I imagine that there's something with a Josh Reynolds on here that's just so low that didn't matter. But anyway, Bo Nix, kind of neutral across the board, but Courtland Sutton, nice. Not now 10,000 Bo Nix Courtland Sutton teams is not nothing, but it's not major. Interestingly, there were basically the same amount of Bo Nix plus Marvin Mims stacks, and there were also the same amount of Bo Nix plus Troy Franklin stacks as there were Courtland Sutton. I think we were maybe a little too heavy on the old young guys, Mims and Franklin, and a little too light on Courtland Sutton. But that one, about 3,000 of those teams. Yeah, definitely. I agree. Charles says, I have a feeling a ton of those Burrow stacks are like Cincinnati mega stacks or that kind of stuff. Yeah, for sure. This isn't like to try and solve world hunger in one data point. There's definitely lots of nuance that goes in there. And in the off season, we're going to try to do some stuff around, drag in some of that nuance, but it's a little too difficult to pull in here just for this conversation. But I think it kind of shows the picture, right? I think it kind of shows exactly what we're looking for. Let's go back to all quarterbacks. Okay. Just really quickly at a couple other advanced rates. It takes all the way down. So Jaden Daniels plus Terry McLaurin was one of the highest drafted stacks. Jaden Daniels plus Zach Ertz, not drafted so much, but did advance at a 30% clip. Terry McLaurin, I guess, though, is right behind here. So, but it took a while, man. It's all Burrow, Lamar. I'm not even going to toss Hurts in there because Hurts advance rates were really, really bad if Saquon was not on the team. So I'm kind of considering this a Saquon stat. It's fine with Hurts, but it's not so much a Hurts. It's Burrow, Lamar, Baker. Like that, if you want to, have high advance rate stacks, it's probably going to be those guys. In terms of number of advancing, again, Burrow, Daniels does sneak on here. Goff does sneak on here. But again, Burrow, Lamar, Baker, it's kind of what you should see. This is funny. 4,000 Deshaun Watson and Jerry Jeudy teams have advanced, and they actually advanced at a 24% clip. Tells you about the Browns. And Njoku's been pretty nice, and Jerry Jeudy has been very nice. Chris Godwin, 27%. Chris Godwin was drafted, almost 16,000 times. With Baker Mayfield, 4,200 of them advanced. So people, the Bucs have just been really good, and Godwin was so good for that stretch that Bucs are definitely high up here. Going to be a lot of Bucs. Going to be a lot of Bucs. Going to be a lot of Bengals. Going to be a lot of Ravens stacks. So we're constantly worried about the the Voldemorts, the Jamar Chases, the Derrick Henrys, but we should also make sure we're not worried, but we're thinking about what kind of these stacks are going to get through, right? Who are what's Baker to Evans, certainly Burrow to Chase, but also Burrow to T, and also Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin. Like, they're not the things that you would first think of. Like, what am I thinking about that my opponents might have in my pods? But they're very, very high up there. Oh gosh. Resident Falcons fan D Ross, how far do you got to go for Kirk and London? Let's see. So first, Kirk Mooney advanced at a 25% clip. Again, also probably mostly a Mooney stat, though Kirk had a couple games. So let's see. All right. Okay. 12%. 12%. Right next to if this isn't the best way to describe how the old Kirk London experiment went, there are fewer Kirk London teams that advanced than Jaden Daniels Ben Sinnott teams. So oof. Can I filter only for late round QBs? I don't have ADP in here, so I can't specifically. But I can pick any name. Somebody said Darnold. Let's look at the Darnold teams. Pretty good. So the nice thing for Darnold is, even though these advance rates are really good, outside of Ty Chandler and Cam Akers, but JJ 28%, Addison 29%, Hawk 24%, Jalen Naylor 23%, Aaron Jones 26%. This is kind of funny. Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones. You stack those two. Hilariously, there's 273 teams that have handcuffed Sam Darnold with Daniel Jones. But the nice thing, if you have Darnold stacks getting through, is from a raw number of advancing teams, it's not quite as many because Darnold didn't really, I don't want to say become available. You could have taken him early in the summer, but people generally were not taking Sam Darnold. But yeah, he is hilariously paired 1,100 times, Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones. I got some of those. Okay, so if you remove me from there, it would definitely be lower because I got some of those for sure. Yeah, me and Pie, we drafted all those Darnold Jones teams. Let's see. Somebody wanted to see if there's Penix. Nope. I need to massage the very ends here, but I don't think Penix was drafted, but we filter out a couple of things in here. I believe with the stack stuff, and he may just not be stacked. But I can double check on that one. Somebody asked about something. Oh, Geno. Yeah, Geno's an interesting one. Seattle's good, and JSN is awesome. Yeah, this is just BBM. Not puppies or anything like that. Hopefully in the future we can get a lot more. We can get some of the other tournaments publicly available to us, and we might get some of it in the off season. But right now we just have BBM. Like I said, it's just one tournament, so some of the other, definitely puppies time box stuff is going to be different than here. But I do feel like it's a good overall kind of encapsulation of what we should expect to see across the different sites and in the different tournaments. Ooh, that's a good one. All right, so Geno and JSN, solid 22%, 3,600 teams out of 16,000. Advanced Metcalf, not quite as good, but still 17, a neutral advance rate there. Tyler Lockett actually advanced at a slightly higher clip, but was drafted significantly fewer times. Noah Fant, even a little bit worse. And Sharbs. So again, man, and Ken Walker, the Geno, the team stacks holding up here, at least from an advance rate perspective. We'll see how the playoffs go, right? But definitely a big key as we dive into all this stuff, that the kind of team stacks, which I would, onslaughts, whatever people want to call them, including the running back in your team stack, right? So Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Chase Brown. including your has when it hits. Now, if you did that with the 49ers, RIP. If you did that, the let's look up Drake May really quick just to see like if we maybe Drake May is different. I don't know. If we do it with right, so if we do it with Drake May, if the offense stinks, it doesn't do anything for your team. It makes it worse, right? 9% Drake May plus Ramondre, 9% Drake May plus Antonio Gibson. If the offense is really bad, including that running back is not helping, it's hurting. But when the offense is at least good, it's helping. It's definitely helping. To that point, I wanted to look at Jaden Daniels as well because we saw, Terry was the really, really heavy stacking partner. But I have to imagine, so if you included B-Rob, a nice 21% advance rate, you included Austin Eckler, 22%, Zach Ertz at 30, Terry at 29, De'Ami Brown at 21, and there's those 27 Jaden Daniels, KJ Osborne teams are feeling a little more life now after Washington signed KJ Osborne. Joshy says, thank you, Rusty. Joshy says, Anthony Richards. I know what it is now with that data. We'll get it fixed. Anthony Richardson, Alec Pierce. Oh, Anthony Richardson. That's an interesting one. Oops. Oof. At least Alec Pierce was the highest, but only 136 AR and Alec Pierce teams left in the playoffs. Goodness gracious. AR Downs, 9% advance rate. AR AD Mitchell, 6% advance rate. Pittman, 4%. Jonathan Taylor, 4%. So see another one. You included JT with Richardson and stacked up the Colts. Yikes. Yikes. But I think if there's one year, maybe the most hopeful for, Downs is fine, of course. But only 100 teams out of the entire remaining pool left with Anthony Richardson and Alec Pierce. Last thing I really wanted to do is I want to pull up the Saquon teams and just okay, let's see how many Saquon teams have these, different players on these advancing teams. Like the Jamar Chase Saquon teams are hilarious. They advanced at an 84% clip, but and so we have 4,800 of them left. But if I sort, that is the highest, right? And I imagine there's quite a bit of crossover here. Joe Burrow is the second highest player, most frequently paired with Saquon on advancing teams. But if this doesn't tell exactly what you'd think, the third highest exposure player on advancing Saquon Barkley teams, Courtland Sutton. 4,384 Saquon teams have Courtland Sutton. So if you don't have Saquon and you don't have Courtland Sutton, there's kind of a double whammy that you're trying to avoid those guys. That's again there's almost as many Courtland Sutton Saquon teams as there are. And again, there can be crossover, but there's almost as many Courtland Sutton Saquon teams as there are Jamar Chase Saquon teams. Terry McLaurin, very high up there. You probably see a trend of after Jamar Chase, the types of wide receivers on Saquon teams. So when we talk again all summer about how people draft the same kinds of players on the same kinds of teams, this is it. This is why. When we say, when you draft, there's nothing wrong. I know, I'm a zero running back, bro. That's how I like to draft. That's how I prefer to play, blah, blah, blah. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with drafting Saquon Barkley. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Bijan Robinson, even if I didn't really do it. But what you then really want to do is not take the same kinds of Saquon Barkley teams, because even when you advance a bunch of them because he hits, you have all the same players on them. Now, you don't want to take bad players, right? You don't want to take players that hold Saquon back, but I don't want all my Saquon teams to have Courtland Sutton and Terry McLaurin and QJ, Jerry Jeudy, Jacoby Myers, Darnell Mooney, Adam Thielen, like these are all the top 15 players on advancing Saquon Barkley teams are all of the exact wide receiver archetypes you think they would be. Sutton, Judy, Mooney, Jacoby Myers, Adam Thielen, right? It's all of those guys. If these teams that, you know who doesn't show up here? You know who doesn't show up? So Chuba does make the list at 12th overall. You know who doesn't show up here? Chase Brown, right? Because the Chase, I got to scroll and scroll and scroll. There's 1,800. Just people only drafted Chase Brown with Saquon Barkley 2,800 times. They advanced at a 67% clip. They're two of the best picks in all of best ball. But Saquon, people don't draft Chase Brown, right? We all have types. We all have archetypes of players. And yeah, we can talk about the structural things and all that kind of stuff. But one of the biggest remaining edges in all best ball is that when you pull up this list of I don't want to fall into all of those exact guys. I understand I took a running back in the second round, so I'm going to be taking wide receivers at certain spots. You know, that is what it is. But I mean, the Mooney stuff, right? These guys are good picks. But I really, yeah, exactly. This is it. Draft half. Tim says the edge next year is to draft half like a slappy, like me, and half like a boomer, like the Saquon people. It's like if we can put all our 2-bit dumb brains together, it's like 2 wrongs don't make a right. Well, 2 idiots maybe make a smart best ball player. Is I think we're figuring out. Don't go full zero running back, bro, and full rookie young player, all that kind of stuff. But don't go full boomer either, because we want to find the right little happy place here. I think JSN was in a range of the draft that made sense for Saquon drafters, but is a little bit, more interesting of an archetype, right? But I mean, look at this. Rashad Bateman, Calvin Ridley, Brandon Cooks, Khalil Shakir, Romeo Dobbs. Like, it's all the guys you would expect to have on here. Now, some of them were good picks, right? But they're also very frequently paired with Saquon Barkley. And I would just really, really like to get away from that. Yeah, Tim says, I'm still bummed about the Saints. They're going to be this year's Texans before all the injuries took them out one by one. Shaheed was smashing. Definitely. Saints looked awesome. If you went ham on the Saints, which I did not, other than Kendra Miller. Speaking of, yeah, 2,800 times Kendra Miller was drafted with Saquon. So, it's light, but it's not crazy. It's totally crazy. Not to be rude, but who is technically the slappies this year? Yeah, me. Me. It's not sharps, it's slappies. Where we often confuse the two. The boomers are just the running back bros. We are the slappies, the idiots that take the worst plays. We draft the worst players. Is the slappy mantra. They say play the best plays in DFS. We play the worst plays. That's the life of a slappy. But I got to get out of here. It's the weekend. We're excited. We're ready to sweat. Week 15, man. It's here. I'm excited. I'm ready. Hopefully, we can have a little better luck than Rams 49ers last night. Yowza. But we'll be back next week. If you're new here, we got a whole bunch of content that has come out this week. There's a Legendary Sickos episode earlier this week. There's Rob and I breaking down the first round. Did some playoff best ball drafts the other day, and going to try to basically keep this going through the rest of the season. We'll mix in some playoff best ball stuff. Have the rankings up in a little bit. We'll continue to draft playoff best ball teams, and then we will also be doing some stuff like this, diving into our sweat, right? We spend all summer drafting and talking about all this silliness. Now's the fun part. We get to sweat it. Plus, I feel like we can find, if we use this time and don't just like sit back and think about only vibes, and we look at some of this data, I think it sticks with us heading into next year. And we can see some of the guys we might want to sweat, right? We can see some of those things that can help us enjoy this final month, these final 3 weeks of the season a little bit more. Like I said, be back Monday. with some more, and we'll be breaking down week 16 next week and doing some playoff best ball. But everybody have a wonderful weekend. Cheers and good luck in week 15.
Woo! Those were some spicy takes. Want to stay up to date with all of the other spicy takes we're going to have over here at Spike Week? Why don't you press that subscribe button below? You turn notifications on, we draft a team, boom, you know about it. We have another spicy take, boom, you know about it. You can be there, you can draft with us. You want to stay up to date? That's how you do it. All right, we'll catch you later next time here at Spike Week.